Let's now go deeper in the analysis of these last 2 years of Israeli genocide against the people of Palestine. We are joined by domestic policy analyst and Ph.D. in Anthropology, Adrienne Pine. Welcome, Doctor, to From the South.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure to have you. We are 2 years into this genocidal war in Gaza. How would you characterize what is happening right now on the ground with these astonishing figures of over 67,000 people killed and many more displaced?
Well, what we know is that those figures are a vast undercount. In fact, there's upwards of 200,000 people killed based on a Lancet study that was done now a long time ago. So those are very conservative estimates. And right now, with the starvation at such a peak level, those deaths are increasing. But this also means that that whoever may survive this is going to have generational damage. Starvation, does tremendous damage to bodies, and there's also a danger of refeeding should this end, of people dying from not initiating eating in the same way again. So the violence and the inaction of the nations of the world is something that needs to end immediately in the next couple of weeks if the people of Gaza who remain have any chance of being saved, and if Palestinians will have any chance of sovereignty going forward.
As you were saying, we're seeing a lot of inaction from certain sectors. There are those still today that support Israel's narrative and say that what is happening in Gaza is not a genocide. Could you briefly break down the legal definition of genocide and explain what specific actions are the Israeli regime committing to, like the humanitarian blockade, the bombardment of safe zones, and the targeting of civilian infrastructure? How do they meet this term?
Well, the Genocide Convention defines genocide, and it has a number of criteria, all of which have been very clearly met. Basically the intentional elimination of a people, and you can look in the text itself. But the main point is that the main court, the International Court of Justice, even the UN last month determined that a genocide is happening. So there's really no question about this whatsoever. And actually, I think the majority of nations understand that this is what's happening. We saw, for example, a year ago on September 8th, 2024, a resolution was passed in the UNGA overwhelmingly by over 90% of the world's nations, voted yes or abstained, demanding that Israel withdraw all of its forces, withdraw entirely settlements as well from the West Bank and Gaza within a year, and that it immediately comply with the orders from the ICJ and the ICC that at the time were finding that there was cause to believe that there was a genocide. So there is a recognition among the states of the world that this is happening. However, they have not done their part under the Genocide Convention, which does compel them to actively act to stop a genocide wherever it is happening. And the ways that states have failed to do so are by continuing to supply to provide military supplies, continuing to allow ships to dock that in their ports that are headed to Israel carrying military supplies, continuing to have diplomatic relations with Israel, continuing to have free trade agreements with Israel. So propping up Israel economically and militarily, even if they are not coming out and supporting Israel in their statements. There are a lot of states that are examples of this. Spain is a great one. Its public statements have been really explicit about condemning the genocide, yet it continues to allow ships to dock in its ports, carrying military supplies and fuel to Israel, and it continues to buy weapons from Israel. However, there are states that have taken really bold actions. We can point to the Hague Group, the member states which have committed to stop allowing these transfers of military equipment and have agreed to some economic measures. But I think in particular, Colombia has, with President Petro promising to introduce a Uniting for Peace resolution in the UN General Assembly, which would send a protective force to Palestine. This is the boldest step that has been taken by a state so far, except for Yemen, I guess we could say, which certainly is complying with its obligations under the Genocide Convention. And if Petro is to present this measure soon, there really is a chance that nations could come behind it and stop the genocide within a month.
Referring to all this, to the nations you were mentioning that continue to supply weapons and to provide diplomatic support in the international arena to Israel, what is the moral and legal responsibility of this nation in the face of what is happening in Gaza?
Well, the genocide is very clear that in the case of a genocide, which, as I mentioned, has been firmly determined by genocide experts. I mean, I could also bring up the Association of Genocide Scholars that issued a statement a month or two ago affirming that this is a genocide by the UN itself. Under the Genocide Convention, states that are parties to the Genocide Convention have an affirmative obligation to cut these ties, to stop sending military weapons, and to actively intervene in the way that President Petro is proposing to stop the genocide. So militarily intervene. In this case, a protective force that would not be one that would be aiming to increase aggressions, but rather merely to protect Palestinians and to open humanitarian corridors to ensure the safe passage and ongoing passage of aid. So states have a very clear obligation under the Genocide Convention and under international law to not be complicit in a genocide. And now there's a concrete way that they can step up those actions and really comply with that obligation.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your time here from the South, for all your inputs.
Thank you.